Welcome back. So our today topic is experimental research. The outline of this lecture is that what is experiment, then what are the major component of an experiment, what are their variable and are the examples of this, as well as types of variable, techniques of controlling extraneous variable and experimental validity. In this, there are two topics. The first is internal validity and the second is external validity. And the next is experimental design. So in this, we will discuss pre-experimental design, true experimental design, and quasi-experimental design. So the first is what is an experiment? Like experiment is a procedure carried out to support, refute, or validate a hypothesis. So experiment provide insight into cause and effect by demonstrating what outcome occur when a particular factor is manipulated. An experiment examines the effect of independent variable and a dependent variable. There are major components of an experiment. The most conventional type of experiment involves three major pair of components. The first is independent and dependent variables. The second is pre-testing and post-testing. And the third is experimental and control groups. So we will discuss variable like an element, feature or factor that is labeled to vary or change is known as variable. Variable is measurable characteristics that varies from time to time or next is it may change from group to group or person to person or within a person over time. So this is what variable is. Now there are examples of variable like gender is a variable. It can take two values, male and female. Next is marital status is a variable. It can take on values of never married, single, married, divorced, and widow. The next is variable may be situation specific. So these are the example of variable. So there are types of variable: independent variables, dependent variables, intervening variable, and extraneous variable. Dependent variable. Dependent variable is also known as a responding variable. It depends on values that result from the independent variable. Simply, the dependent variable is what is affected by the independent variables. The dependent variable dv is just like the name sound. It depends upon some factor that you, the researcher, controls. For example, how well you perform in a race depend on your training, and how much you earn depend upon the number of hours you work. The next is there can be one or more dependent variable in an experiment. The next type of variable is independent variable. Like independent variable is also known as manipulated variable because it is independent variable. So simply the independent variable is the condition that you change in experiment. It is the variable you control. It is called independent because its value doesn't affect by other variables. So there can be only one independent variable in an experiment and it produces one or more result known as dependent variable. For example, ice cream lead to fever and IQ vary with age. Governing variable is a variable whose existence is inferred but it can't be measured and manipulated. They are not only directly observable but they link the independent and dependent variable with each other. It helps in explain the relationship between two variables. Like we have income, level of education, and spending. These are the three variables which are interrelated or are related with each other. Now we have extraneous variable. It is also called confound variable. Extraneous variable are factors in the research which may have an effect on the dependent variable but which are not controlled. So extraneous variables are dangerous. They may damage the study validity. In other words, these are all variables which are not the independent variable but could affect the result of the experiment. They are the things that influence our result and are a source of error. For instance, if we are testing the influence of temperature on plant growth, we want to make sure that the soil type, what is the soil type and what are the amount of water given to the soil is constant. Otherwise, they are extraneous variables. Now we have experimental research. In this, the researcher manipulate independent variables, for example, type of treatment, teaching method, and communication strategies. And measures dependent variable include anxiety level, English comprehension, and satisfaction. In order to establish cause and effect relationship between them, so the independent variable is controlled or set by the researcher. On the other hand, the dependent variable is measured by the researcher. So an experiment is a prescribed set of conditions which permit measurement of the effect of particular treatment. Now we have there are some parts of experiment including dependent variable, pre-test, post-test, experimental group, control group, and random assignment. That treatment are we can say the independent variable. So what is a pretest? The pretest is the measurement of the dependent variable prior to the introduction of the treatment. In this, we can say the example included anxiety. The next is post-test. The post-test is the measurement of the dependent variable after treatment has been introduced into experimental group. It's called post-test. Now we have some techniques of controlling the extraneous variable including randomization and removing the variable, matching cases, balancing cases, as well as analysis of covariance. So these are some techniques to control the extraneous variable. What is experimental validity? We have two types, the internal validity as well as external validity. So indicate whether the independent variable was the sole cause of the change in the dependent variable. Internal invalidity asks the question like, are the measurement I make on my dependent, for example, the variable I measure variable influenced only by the treatment, or there are other influences which change it. So this is the internal validity question. Next is external validity, and it indicates the extent to which the result of the experiment are applicable to the real world. So there are internal validity versus external validity. And first we have internal validity, like what are the cause and what are its effect on the whole experiment. On the other hand, the external validity, like generalizability to your patient or your practice, is called external validity. There are some steps in experimental research, like state the research problem, determine if experimental method apply or not, specify the dependent variable and specify the independent variable as well, state the tentative hypothesis like some threshold, and what are the determinants that measure in the when you use it, and what a pause to consider potential success, identify the intervening extraneous variable, formal statement of research hypothesis, design the experiment, final estimate of potential success, as well as conduct the study as planned, analyze the collected data, prepare a research report. So these are some steps of the experimental research. Now we have internal validity. In this we have the history, then maturation, and then we have tested instrumentation, that what instrument are there to be used, statistical regression and differential selection, experimental mortality and selection, maturation, interaction, the John Henry effect, and experimental treatment diffusion. So these are the internal validity parts. So treat to external validity, we have population validity, Hawthorne effect, and experiment effect, as well as pre-test sensitization and A reactive effect of testing, treatment and subject interaction, testing and subject interaction, multiple treatment effect. So these are the external validity. Now we have some types of experimental research design. We have pre-experimental research design. After that, we have true experimental research design and quasi-experimental research design. So we will discuss all of them one by one. What are the types of experimental research? Like we have single variable design, factorial design. In this we have true experimental design, quasi-experimental design and pre-experimental design. So true experimental design included pre-test, post-test, control group design, post-test only control the group design and Solomon for group design. On the other hand, we have quiz experimental design. So we have two non-equivalent control group, time series, multiple time series. And the last but not the least, the pre-experimental design included one short case study, one group or pre-test post-test, or we can say the static group comparison. Now we have true experimental design. Like experimental design are considered true experiment when they employ randomization in the selection of the sample and control for extraneous influences of variation on the dependent variables. So the three design we will consider in this section are the best choices of for the experimental decision. These are the pre-test, post-test control group design, post-test only control group design, and the Solomon four group design. So these are the different types of the true experimental group design. Now we have some advantages of the true experimental design included the greater internal validity, casual claims can be investigated. On the other hand, we have disadvantages as well, like less external validity, not like a real world condition, are not very practical is the very big one. Now we have quasi experimental design that without proper randomization, lack of rigorous statistical scrutiny, and the lack of some of the control of the true experimental design, but are generally considered to be fine. As the example included that no non-equivalent group design. Some advantages of the quiz experimental design included greater external validity, like more reliable or more related to the real world condition, much more feasible given time and logistical constraints. On the other hand, we have disadvantages like not as many variable control, less casual claims. So what are the pre-experimental design? Weak experimental design in terms of control, no random sampling, threats to internal and external validity are significant problem. So there are many definite weakness. For example, one-shot design, one group pre-test, post-test design, static group design.